What if I told you that a single apology, spoken by someone society dismisses as invisible, could transform an entire company's future? This is the story of Julia Park, a 25-year-old temporary administrative assistant at Brighter Future, an educational technology company in downtown Seattle. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, Julia would arrive at the gleaming corporate tower, her worn messenger bag slung over her shoulder, carrying the weight of responsibilities that weren't officially hers. She moved through the marble lobby like a shadow greeting the security guard with genuine warmth, while executives rushed past without acknowledgement. "Good morning, Mr. Howard," she'd say, her voice soft but sincere. The 70-year-old security guard would smile. She was the only employee who bothered to learn his name. But here's what no one knew about Julia Park. Behind those quiet eyes and hesitant voice lived a mind that catalogued every detail, every inefficiency, every overlooked problem in that building. While others saw a timid girl doing menial tasks, Julia saw patterns. She saw solutions. She saw a system that could work better, if only someone would listen. Julia's story didn't begin in that corporate tower. It began 3 years earlier, when she was a promising education major at the University of Washington, specializing in early childhood development. She had dreams of becoming a kindergarten teacher, of nurturing young minds and creating safe spaces for children to grow. But life, as it often does, had other plans. When her mother lost her battle with cancer during Julia's junior year, everything changed. With her younger brother Michael still in high school, Julia made the impossible choice that thousands of young people face every year. She dropped out to become the provider. The family she dreamed of teaching became her own family she needed to support. The transition from student to temporary worker was jarring. Julia's natural introversion, which had served her well in one-on-one tutoring sessions with children, became a liability in the competitive corporate environment. She was the kind of person who absorbed information like a sponge, but spoke up like a whisper. In a world that rewarded volume over value, Julia learned to make herself smaller. At Brighter Future, hierarchy wasn't just organizational, it was cultural. The company developed educational software for schools, but ironically it had forgotten how to nurture the potential in its own people. The executives on the 15th floor lived in a different world from the support staff in the basement-level break room, and Julia? She existed somewhere in between, noticed only when something went wrong. Daniel Rowe, the 46-year-old CEO, was a man shaped by his own struggles. Having risen from scholarship programs and community college to Harvard Business School, he understood the value of second chances. But success had created distance. He moved through his company like a figure in a portrait, visible but untouchable, respected but disconnected from the daily struggles of his employees. Recent personal tragedy had begun to crack his professional facade. The loss of his younger sister to depression had awakened something in Daniel, a recognition that beneath the polished surface of corporate success, people were suffering in silence. He'd started noticing things. The custodian who worked 3 jobs, the intern who never ate lunch, the quiet assistant who seemed to carry the weight of everyone else's mistakes. Then there was Megan Torres, the 27-year-old executive assistant who'd mastered the art of corporate theater. Sharp, articulate, and devastatingly efficient, Megan represented everything the company valued: confidence, charisma, and the ability to command attention. She'd risen quickly through the ranks, leaving behind anyone she deemed professionally inadequate. To Megan, Julia wasn't just invisible, she was an embarrassment, a reminder of what happened when companies hired based on sympathy rather than capability. Megan had worked too hard to surround herself with excellence, to tolerate what she saw as Julia's soft incompetence. But Mr. Howard, the security guard who'd watched 3 generations of employees pass through those glass doors, saw something different in Julia. As a former vocational counselor, he recognized the signs of hidden potential. The way Julia's eyes lit up when she talked about the educational programs the company developed, how she'd linger after meetings to organize materials that weren't her responsibility, the careful notes she'd leave for colleagues who'd forgotten important details. Most people, Mr. Howard would later reflect, mistake quiet for empty, But some vessels hold the deepest waters. The stage was set at brighter future for a collision between old assumptions and new possibilities. In the executive conference room where million-dollar decisions were made, in the cramped supply closet where Julia sorted materials for presentations she'd never attend, in the security desk where Mr. Howard observed the daily dance of corporate hierarchy, all the pieces were in place for a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about leadership, potential, and the courage to speak truth to power. Julia didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the catalyst for a transformation that would ripple through every floor of that gleaming tower. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. Sometimes the person who apologizes for everyone else's mistakes is the one person who's never made one herself. As autumn deepened into winter, Brighter Future faced mounting pressure. The company's flagship product, an adaptive learning platform for elementary schools, was struggling with implementation issues across the country. Teachers complained about glitches, administrators demanded fixes, and the competition was gaining ground. In the executive suite, stress levels soared. Emergency meetings became routine, budgets tightened. And like water flowing downhill, that pressure reached every corner of the organization, including the temporary workers who kept the daily operations running. Julia found herself working longer hours, handling tasks that multiplied faster than she could complete them. She'd arrive earlier, stay later, and fill the gaps that others left behind. When the printer jammed during crucial presentations, Julia was there with her small toolkit. When catering for important meetings fell through, Julia knew which local restaurants could deliver on short notice. When visiting clients needed last-minute accommodations, Julia had already researched backup options. But here's the cruel irony of being indispensable in an invisible role. The better Julia performed, the more she was taken for granted. Her competence created a safety net that allowed others to be careless, knowing she'd catch their mistakes. Megan, meanwhile, was building her reputation as Daniel's go-to executive assistant. She'd mastered the art of corporate communication, the right buzzwords, the confident presentation style, the ability to make even simple updates sound strategic. In meetings, her voice carried authority. Her PowerPoint presentations were flawless. Her professional wardrobe commanded respect. But beneath the polished exterior, cracks were beginning to show. The technical complexities of the educational software troubled her. When teachers called with implementation questions, she'd transfer them to various departments without understanding their actual needs. When clients requested customizations, she'd make promises the development team couldn't keep. Julia, who'd grown up helping her mother teach after-school programs, understood the teachers' frustrations instinctively. She'd listen to their voicemails, read their emails, and quietly compile notes about recurring issues. But when she tried to share these insights with Megan, she was dismissed with a wave of perfectly manicured fingers. "Julia, I appreciate your enthusiasm," Megan would say, her tone dripping with condescension. "But client strategy is handled at the executive level. Your job is to focus on filing and supply orders." The dismissal stung, but Julia had learned to swallow such slights. She continued her unofficial research, creating detailed spreadsheets tracking common problems and potential solutions. She studied the company's educational methodology, watched online tutorials about child development, and read academic papers about adaptive learning technologies. Meanwhile, Daniel Rowe found himself caught between competing pressures. The board demanded improved performance metrics. Investors questioned the company's technical capabilities. And in the quiet moments between crises, he couldn't shake the memory of his sister's final words. "I always felt like I was invisible, even when I was screaming for help." Those words had planted a seed of doubt about his own leadership style. How many voices in his company were going unheard? How many valuable insights were being lost because they came from the wrong people? The breaking point came on a grey Tuesday in November, during what should have been a routine quarterly review meeting with the school district of Portland, Oregon, Brighter Future's largest client. The conference room on the 14th floor buzzed with nervous energy. Daniel sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by his department heads. Megan had prepared an elaborate presentation showcasing improved user engagement metrics and positive feedback from select schools. But Dr. Sarah Chen, Portland's Director of Educational Technology, had come prepared with different data. "We're seeing concerning patterns," Dr. Chen began, her laptop connected to the room's large display. "Teacher abandonment rates for your platform have increased by 37% since implementation. The adaptive algorithms aren't adjusting properly for students with learning differences, and our special education coordinators report that the system actually creates more barriers than it removes." The room fell silent. Department heads shifted uncomfortably. Megan's confident presentation suddenly seemed irrelevant. "We're also receiving complaints about your support system," Dr. Chen continued. "Teachers are spending hours on hold, getting transferred between departments and receiving generic solutions that don't address their specific classroom needs." Daniel felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. This wasn't just about metrics. This was about real children struggling with technology that was supposed to help them learn. "I assure you, Dr. Chen," Megan interjected smoothly, "our user satisfaction surveys show overwhelmingly positive responses." "With respect," Dr. Chen interrupted, "surveys completed by administrators aren't the same as feedback from teachers actually using the system daily. We need solutions that work in real classrooms, not just in theoretical frameworks." As the meeting deteriorated, Julia was in the supply room 3 floors below, organizing materials for a different presentation. But she could hear the tension in the voices echoing through the ventilation system. She'd heard those same frustrations before, in the voicemails left for customer service, in the emails forwarded between departments, in the concerned conversations she'd overheard between visiting educators. Without thinking, Julia found herself walking toward the conference room. She'd compiled extensive notes about the recurring technical issues, not because it was her job, but because she'd recognized patterns that others had missed. She'd even drafted potential solutions, drawing on her education background to understand what teachers actually needed. But as she approached the conference room, she saw Megan through the glass walls, gesturing confidently while speaking to Dr. Chen. This wasn't Julia's world. She didn't belong in executive meetings. She didn't have the right credentials, the right clothes, or the right voice. Julia turned back toward the supply room, her heart pounding with frustration and self-doubt. In her hand, she clutched a folder containing insights that could potentially save the Portland contract and help thousands of students learn more effectively. But in the corporate hierarchy of brighter future, good ideas from the wrong person were still wrong ideas. The Portland meeting ended with a conditional renewal. The district would continue using Brighter Future's platform for 6 more months, but with the clear understanding that significant improvements were required. Dr. Chen's parting words hung in the air like a challenge. "We believe in your mission, but we need to see evidence that you believe in ours." In the days that followed, panic spread through the executive floors. Emergency task forces were formed, consultants were hired, all-hands meetings were called. But despite the flurry of activity, the fundamental problems remained unchanged. Julia watched the chaos unfold from her peripheral position, like a quiet observer at the edge of a storm. She saw managers scrambling to assign blame rather than identify solutions. She witnessed heated arguments about resource allocation, while the actual issues, the ones she'd documented so carefully, went unaddressed. The company's technical team, led by brilliant programmers who understood code better than classrooms, worked frantically to fix reported bugs. But they were solving the wrong problems. The issues weren't primarily technical, they were pedagogical. The software wasn't failing because of coding errors. It was failing because it didn't understand how real children actually learn. Julia knew this because she'd spent countless hours studying both the company's platform and the principles of developmental education. During her lunch breaks, she'd researched adaptive learning algorithms. In the evenings, after her official duties were complete, she'd analyze user feedback patterns. She'd even created detailed user personas based on the teacher complaints she'd categorized. Elementary educators in urban schools, special education coordinators in rural districts, ESL instructors working with immigrant populations. But every time she tried to share these insights, she encountered the same invisible barriers. Her ideas were dismissed before they were heard. Her research was viewed as overstepping boundaries. Her genuine passion for the company's mission was interpreted as naive enthusiasm from someone who didn't understand the business side. Megan, meanwhile, was feeling the pressure of her elevated position. The Portland meeting had exposed gaps in her knowledge that her presentation skills couldn't cover. She'd promised improvements she couldn't deliver and made commitments the company couldn't fulfill. Worse, she'd begun to suspect that the quiet assistant she'd dismissed so casually might actually understand things she didn't. This realization bred a dangerous combination of insecurity and resentment. Instead of acknowledging Julia's insights, Megan doubled down on her gatekeeping role. She began excluding Julia from planning meetings entirely, limiting her access to client communications and subtly undermining her credibility with other staff members. "I'm concerned about Julia's recent behavior," Megan mentioned to Human Resources. "She seems to be inserting herself into projects beyond her scope. We need to maintain professional boundaries." But the problems at Brighter Future weren't going away. More school districts began expressing similar concerns to Portland's. User engagement metrics continued declining. Teacher retention rates for the platform reached critical lows, and in his corner office, Daniel Rowe stared at reports that painted an increasingly troubling picture. The company his team had built to revolutionize education was failing the very people it was meant to serve. Somewhere between the venture capital funding and the corporate expansion, they'd lost sight of their core mission: helping children learn. The crisis reached a crescendo on a snowy December afternoon, when representatives from 3 major school districts, Chicago, Denver, and Phoenix, joined a conference call that would determine Brighter Future's future. The call was scheduled for 2 p.m. with Daniel, Megan, and the department heads gathered in the main conference room. But 30 minutes before the meeting, disaster struck. The presentation slides, containing crucial data about platform improvements and user satisfaction metrics, had somehow become corrupted. "The files won't open," announced Tom Richardson, the IT director, his face pale with panic. "Something happened to the master presentation file. All we have are fragments." Megan's composure cracked for the first time anyone could remember. "That's impossible. I saved backup copies on 3 different systems." "Well, they're all corrupted," Tom replied grimly. "It looks like there was a synchronization error overnight. We have maybe 20 minutes to rebuild the entire presentation." The room erupted in controlled chaos. Staff members scattered to find alternative data sources. Phones rang as people called various departments for updated statistics. Voices rose. As the enormity of the situation became clear, they were about to face their most important clients, with nothing but empty slides and vague promises. Julia, who'd been quietly organizing materials in an adjacent room, heard the commotion. Through the glass wall, she could see the panic on everyone's faces. She'd witnessed this kind of technical disaster before, and she knew that 20 minutes wasn't enough time to recreate complex presentations from scratch. But Julia also knew something the executives didn't. She'd been maintaining her own comprehensive database of user feedback, technical issues, and improvement suggestions. Not because anyone had asked her to, but because she'd recognized the patterns emerging from customer communications. Her files contained exactly the kind of detailed, accurate information they needed for this crucial meeting. Taking a deep breath, Julia approached the conference room. Her heart pounded as she knocked softly on the glass door. Megan looked up with obvious irritation. "Julia, we're dealing with a crisis here. Whatever supply issue you're concerned about will need to wait." I might be able to help," Julia said quietly, her voice barely audible over the urgent conversations happening around the table. The room fell silent. Daniel, who'd been frantically reviewing printed reports, looked up for the first time. "I've been tracking user feedback patterns," Julia continued, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment at suddenly being the center of attention. "I have current data about the issues the districts have raised, and I've compiled some analysis about potential solutions." Megan's eyes flashed with anger. "Julia, this is not the time for you to play consultant. We need professional-grade presentations, not amateur research projects. But Daniel raised his hand for silence. Something in Julia's tone, the quiet confidence beneath the nervous delivery, caught his attention. What kind of data do you have, Julia? User engagement metrics by school district, categorized by grade level and student demographic, teacher retention rates correlated with specific platform features, and, Julia hesitated, then pressed, on detailed feedback from special education coordinators about accessibility barriers. The room was completely quiet now. These were exactly the data points they needed, the same information they'd been scrambling to recreate from various incomplete sources. How current is this information? Daniel asked. I updated everything yesterday, Julia replied. I've been tracking trends weekly since September. Tom Richardson looked up from his laptop with something approaching hope. If we could access that data, we might be able to build a functional presentation in time. But Megan wasn't ready to relinquish control. Daniel, I need to remind you that Julia doesn't have access to official client data. Whatever she's compiled is probably incomplete or inaccurate. The clock on the wall showed 1:47 p.m. 13 minutes. So until the most important call of the company's recent history, Daniel looked at Julia, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. In her nervous stance and earnest expression, he recognized something familiar, the determination of someone who'd been overlooked but hadn't given up. It reminded him of his younger self, struggling to be heard in rooms where his voice seemed to carry no weight. Julia, he said quietly, show me what you have. What happened next would be remembered as the moment everything changed at Brighter Future, not just for Julia, but for everyone who'd ever felt invisible in their own workplace. Julia hurried to her small desk, her hands trembling as she gathered her carefully organized files. Behind her, she could hear Megan's voice rising in protest. Daniel, we're about to face our biggest clients with amateur hour research. This is incredibly unprofessional. But when Julia returned to the conference room with her folders and tablet, something extraordinary happened. The data she spread across the table wasn't just comprehensive, it was revelatory. Month by month, she'd tracked patterns that the official reports had missed. She'd identified specific technical issues that correlated with user abandonment. She'd categorized teacher feedback into actionable insights that revealed exactly why. The platform was failing its users. Here, Julia said softly, opening her tablet to a detailed spreadsheet. You can see that schools with higher special education populations abandon the platform at 3 times the rate of typical schools. But it's not because of the students. It's because the interface doesn't accommodate assistive technologies. Daniel leaned forward, studying the data with growing amazement. How did you identify this pattern? I started noticing that teachers from these schools would call customer service repeatedly with the same issues. So I began tracking their requests and cross-referencing them with student demographic data that's publicly available from the Department of Education. Tom Richardson, the IT director, was already pulling up the platform's accessibility settings on his laptop. She's right. We built this for standard classroom setups, but we never tested it with screen readers or voice recognition software, Julia continued, her confidence growing as she saw the executives actually listening. And the engagement drop-offs in Chicago, they're not random. They correlate with specific schools that have high percentages of English language learners. The adaptive algorithms aren't accounting for language acquisition patterns. She flipped to another section of her research. I've been studying developmental linguistics in my spare time, and children learning English as a second language need different scaffolding than native speakers. The platform assumes all reading difficulties are learning disabilities, but sometimes they're just language barriers. The room had transformed from chaos to focused attention. Even Megan had stopped objecting, though her expression remained stony. What about solutions? Daniel asked. Do you have recommendations? Julia's eyes lit up. This was the question she'd been hoping someone would ask for months. Yes, actually. Most of the fixes aren't technical. They're pedagogical. We need to adjust the adaptive algorithms to recognize different types of learning challenges. And we need to provide teachers with better diagnostic tools so they can customize the platform for their specific student populations. She pulled out a hand-drawn flowchart that showed how the platform could be modified to better serve diverse learners. The diagram was detailed, thoughtful, and clearly the product of extensive research and genuine understanding of both education and technology. "Julia," Daniel said slowly, "how long have you been working on this?" "Since I started here," she admitted. "I know it's not my job, but I keep thinking about the students. The platform has so much potential to help kids who struggle in traditional classrooms, but only if we build it right." At 1:58 p.m., with 2 minutes until the crucial conference call, Daniel made a decision that would change the trajectory of his company and Julia's life. "Tom, can you transfer Julia's data to the presentation system?" "Already on it," Tom replied, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Megan, I need you to facilitate the call logistics and manage the technical setup." "Of course," Megan replied tightly. "And Julia," Daniel paused, meeting her eyes directly, "I need you to present your findings to our clients." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia felt the blood rush to her face as every person in the room stared at her. I don't think I'm qualified for that," she whispered. "You're the most qualified person in this room," Daniel replied firmly. "You understand our users better than anyone. You've identified problems we missed and solutions we need. These school districts don't need another polished presentation. They need someone who actually understands their challenges." At exactly 2:10 p.m., the conference call began. On the screen, they could see Dr. Sarah Chen from Portland, joined by Dr. Marcus Williams from Chicago Public Schools, Dr. Jennifer Martinez from Denver, and Dr. Robert Thompson from Phoenix. Daniel began with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Thank you all for joining us today. I want to start by acknowledging that we've let you down. Our platform hasn't delivered the results we promised, and your students have suffered because of our mistakes." The clients shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the defensive corporate response they'd expected. "Today, I want you to hear from someone who's been listening to your concerns more carefully than anyone else in our organization. Julia Park, our educational research specialist, has been tracking the specific issues you've raised and developing targeted solutions." Julia felt her stomach drop. Educational research specialist. That wasn't her title. That wasn't even close to her title. But Daniel's steady gaze gave her strength. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "Dr. Chen, Dr. Williams, Dr. Martinez, Dr. Thompson, thank you for your patience with our platform. I've been analyzing the feedback from your teachers, and I want to start by addressing the specific concerns you've raised." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a sincerity that immediately captured attention. "Dr. Williams, your Chicago teachers have reported that the platform doesn't work well for English language learners. You're absolutely right. Our adaptive algorithms were designed around native English speakers, so when a student struggles with reading, the system assumes it's a comprehension issue rather than a language acquisition challenge." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "That's exactly what our ESL coordinators have been telling us. How do you propose we address it?" Julia's confidence grew. "We need to add a language background module to the student assessment process. When the system detects reading difficulties, it should first determine whether the student is working in their native language or acquiring English. Then it can provide appropriate scaffolding, vocabulary support for language learners, or comprehension strategies for native speakers with reading challenges." Dr. Martinez from Denver interjected. "Our special education teachers have similar concerns. The platform seems to over-identify learning disabilities." "You're right, Dr. Martinez. I've been tracking the referral patterns, and students using our platform are being referred for special education evaluations at twice the normal rate. That's because we're interpreting adaptive learning as remedial learning." Julia pulled up a diagram on her tablet, which Tom quickly transferred to the shared screen. "This flowchart shows how we can modify the platform to distinguish between different types of learning needs. A student who needs more time to process information isn't necessarily learning disabled. They might just need a different pace or presentation style." Dr. Thompson from Phoenix, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "This is the kind of nuanced thinking we need. Too many educational technology companies treat all struggling students the same way. Exactly, Dr. Thompson, and that's why I'm recommending we partner with your teachers to customize the platform for each district's specific population. Phoenix has different needs than Chicago, which has different needs than Portland. Julia's enthusiasm was becoming contagious. As she spoke, her nervousness faded, replaced by genuine passion for the work. I've drafted individual improvement plans for each of your districts, based on your demographic data and the specific feedback we've received from your teachers. For example, Phoenix's high percentage of Spanish-speaking families means we should integrate more bilingual learning supports. Chicago's urban density means we need better offline capabilities for students with limited internet access. Dr. Chen from Portland, who'd been skeptical at the beginning, was now taking notes. Julia, these recommendations demonstrate a level of understanding about our actual classroom needs that we haven't seen from other technology companies. I appreciate that, Dr. Chen, but I have to give credit to your teachers. They've been incredibly detailed in their feedback. The problem wasn't that we weren't receiving good information. The problem was that we weren't listening to it systematically. Dr. Williams from Chicago leaned back in his chair. Julia, I have to ask, what's your educational background? You're speaking like someone who's actually worked in diverse classrooms. Julia's cheeks flushed. I studied early childhood education in college, and I grew up helping my mother with after-school programs for immigrant families. I didn't finish my degree because of family circumstances, but I've continued studying developmental pedagogy on my own. The response from the clients was immediate and positive. Dr. Martinez smiled for the first time during the call. That explains why you understand our challenges so well. Most edtech companies are founded by people who've never actually taught children. Dr. Thompson from Phoenix made a statement that would change everything. Julia, would you be willing to lead the implementation of these improvements in our district? We'd want you to work directly with our curriculum coordinators and special education team. Before Julia could respond, Dr. Williams from Chicago jumped in. We'd like the same arrangement. Having someone who actually understands diverse learning needs would be invaluable. Dr. Chen from Portland nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Julia, we've been frustrated by typical customer service representatives who don't understand education. Having you as our primary contact would address most of our concerns about the partnership. Julia looked around the room in amazement. 3 major school districts were requesting to work with her directly, not with the executives, not with the official client relations team, but with her. Daniel, who'd been watching this transformation with growing pride, made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. Julia, I'm promoting you to Director of Educational Partnerships, effective immediately. Your job will be to work directly with our school district clients to customize the platform for their specific needs. The aftermath of that conference call sent shockwaves through Brighter Future. Within hours, word had spread through every department that the quiet temporary assistant had been promoted to a director-level position after presenting research that saved the company's most important client relationships. But the real transformation was just beginning. Over the following weeks, Julia's new role expanded beyond anyone's expectations. The school districts that had been considering canceling their contracts not only renewed them, but began recommending Brighter Future to other districts. The key difference was Julia's approach. Instead of trying to sell the platform as a one-size-fits-all solution, she worked with each district to customize it for their specific student populations. Her first major success came in Phoenix, where she spent a week observing actual classrooms and talking with teachers about their daily challenges. The insights she gathered led to modifications that increased teacher retention on the platform by 200% within a month. In Chicago, she partnered with the district's ESL coordinators to develop language learning modules that addressed the specific needs of students from Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin-speaking families. The improvements were so successful that the district began showcasing Brighter Future's platform at national education conferences. But perhaps most importantly, Julia's promotion sent a message throughout the company that quiet competence could be just as valuable as loud confidence. Employees who'd been hesitant to share ideas began speaking up. The culture slowly shifted from rewarding performance to recognizing insight. Mr. Howard, the security guard who'd always seen Julia's potential, watched her transformation with quiet pride. "Some people," he told her one morning as she passed his desk, "are born to lead from the front. Others are born to lift from behind. The wise ones learn to do both." Megan's response to Julia's promotion was complicated. Initially resistant and resentful, she gradually came to understand that Julia's success didn't diminish her own capabilities. It highlighted different strengths. Over time, Megan would become one of Julia's strongest supporters, using her presentation skills to help communicate Julia's insights to broader audiences. The company's financial performance improved dramatically. Client satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Teacher retention rates on the platform doubled, then tripled, and most importantly, student learning outcomes in schools using the customized platform showed significant improvements across all demographic groups. Julia's story began to attract attention beyond Brighter Future. Education journals interviewed her about her research methods. Technology conferences invited her to speak about user-centered design. Graduate schools reached out to offer her opportunities to complete her degree while working. But for Julia, the most meaningful recognition came in the form of emails from teachers, real educators working with real students who were finally getting the support they needed to succeed. "Dear Julia," wrote Mrs. Rodriguez from a Title I school in Phoenix, "I wanted you to know that your modifications to the reading assessment have helped 3 of my students avoid special education referrals. They weren't learning disabled, they just needed material presented in ways that connected to their cultural backgrounds. Thank you for seeing them as whole children, not just data points." These letters became Julia's most treasured possessions, evidence that her quiet work behind the scenes was making a real difference in the lives of children who'd been struggling in silence just as she had. 6 months after that transformative conference call, Brighter Future had become a different company. The quarterly board meeting that had once been a source of anxiety for Daniel now buzzed with positive energy as he presented metrics that exceeded everyone's expectations. "Client retention is up 67%, Daniel announced to the room full of investors and board members. "Teacher satisfaction scores have improved by over 200%. And most importantly, student learning outcomes in districts using our customized platform are showing measurable improvements across all demographic categories." But the numbers only told part of the story. The real transformation was cultural. Julia's success had created a ripple effect throughout the organization. Other quiet employees began finding their voices. The janitor who'd noticed patterns in when computer systems crashed most often was invited to join the IT team's troubleshooting meetings. The cafeteria manager who'd observed which healthy food options actually got eaten by staff was asked to help redesign the company wellness program. "We've learned," Daniel continued, "that innovation doesn't always come from the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it comes from the person who's been listening most carefully." Julia herself had transformed physically and professionally. Gone were the hesitant movements and apologetic tone. She now carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her value and could communicate it effectively. Her wardrobe had evolved from thrift store basics to professional attire that reflected her growing status. But she'd retained the authentic warmth that made teachers and students feel heard. Her new office on the 12th floor, a space with windows overlooking the city, her name on the door, and walls covered with thank you letters from educators, represented more than a promotion. It represented a fundamental shift in how the company valued different types of intelligence and contribution. But Julia's transformation went beyond professional success. With her increased salary, she'd been able to move her family into a better apartment. Her younger brother Michael, now a senior in high school, was applying to colleges with Julia's full support. The dreams that had been deferred were being reconstructed in new forms. "I used to think I'd failed," Julia told a group of education students during a guest lecture at her former university. "I dropped out of college, I was working a temporary job, and I felt invisible in my own workplace. But sometimes what feels like failure is just preparation for something you never imagined possible. Her story had begun attracting media attention. Education Week featured her on their cover as the quiet revolutionary who's changing EdTech. Harvard Business Review published a case study about Brighter Future's cultural transformation, focusing on how recognizing hidden talent had driven innovation. But Julia remained grounded in the work itself. Every morning she still arrived at the office early, though now it was to review feedback from new districts considering partnerships. She still maintained her detailed spreadsheets, though now they were used to guide million-dollar decisions, rather than organized supply closets. The most meaningful change, however, was in her relationship with the people around her. Mr. Howard, the security guard who'd always seen her potential, now greeted her each morning with obvious pride. "There goes our director," he'd say with a smile that spoke volumes about the journey they'd both witnessed. Daniel Rowe, who'd learned to recognize quiet leadership, had become both a mentor and an advocate. Under his guidance, Julia was developing skills she'd never imagined needing: public speaking, strategic planning, budget management. But he was also learning from her, discovering that authentic leadership sometimes meant creating space for others to shine rather than commanding attention yourself. "Julia," he told her during one of their weekly mentoring sessions, "you've taught me that the best leaders aren't always the ones who make the most noise. Sometimes they're the ones who make sure everyone else's voice gets heard." Even Megan Torres had undergone her own transformation. Initially resistant to Julia's promotion, she'd gradually come to understand that there was room for multiple types of excellence within the organization. Her presentation skills and Julia's research insights had proven to be a powerful combination. Together, they developed a client communication approach that was both polished and authentic. "I used to think that being professional meant being perfect," Megan admitted during a team reflection meeting. "Julia showed me that being professional means being honest about what you don't know and relentless about learning what you need to know." As spring arrived, Julia found herself in a position she'd never anticipated, mentoring others who felt invisible in their workplaces. The company had instituted a Hidden Talents initiative, where employees at all levels could propose improvements to company processes or client services. The first person to take advantage of this program was Maria Santos, a night custodian, who'd been quietly observing patterns in office energy usage. Her suggestions for optimizing heating and lighting systems saved the company thousands of dollars in utility costs and earned her a promotion to facilities coordinator. Next came David Kim, a soft-spoken intern who'd noticed inefficiencies in the customer service ticketing system. His proposed reorganization reduced response times by 40% and led to his full-time hiring as a process improvement specialist. "This is what I want Brighter Future to be known for," Daniel announced at the company's annual meeting. "Not just as a place that develops educational technology, but as an organization that develops human potential." Julia's role had expanded beyond client relations to include internal talent development. She was working with human resources to identify employees whose contributions might be overlooked and creating pathways for their growth. But perhaps the most meaningful full-circle moment came when Julia received a letter from Dr. Amanda Peterson, her former education professor at the University of Washington. "Dear Julia," the letter began, "I've been following your remarkable journey in the education technology field. I want you to know that we'd be honored to have you complete your degree through our executive education program for working professionals. Your real-world experience has already taken you far beyond where most of our graduates reach. We'd love to help you formalize that knowledge." The opportunity to finish her education degree, something she'd thought was lost forever, represented more than academic achievement. It was validation that her path, however unconventional, had led her exactly where she needed to be. 1 year after that pivotal December afternoon, Brighter Future hosted its first annual Innovation Through Inclusion conference. Education leaders from across the country had gathered to learn about the company's transformation and to hear Julia speak about recognizing hidden potential in organizations. The conference was held in the same building where Julia had once sorted supplies in basement storage rooms. But now she stood on the main stage of the company's newly constructed conference center, looking out at an audience of superintendents, principals, teachers, and technology leaders. "A year ago," Julia began, her voice now carrying the confident cadence of someone who'd learned to trust her own expertise. "I was invisible in this very building. I was the person who cleaned up after meetings, who organized materials for presentations I'd never attend, who listened to problems I wasn't supposed to solve." The audience was completely silent, drawn in by her authenticity. "I want to tell you about the day I almost quit. I'd been blamed for a mistake I didn't make, dismissed by colleagues who didn't value my input, and marginalized by a system that confused volume with value. I was ready to accept that some people are meant to remain invisible." Julia paused, scanning the audience until her eyes found Mr. Howard, sitting in the front row wearing his best suit, beaming with pride. "But someone believed in me before I believed in myself. Someone recognized that quiet observation could be just as valuable as loud assertion. And someone created space for a different kind of leadership to emerge." She gestured toward Daniel, who was sitting with the other company executives. "What I've learned this year is that every organization has Julia Parks, people who see solutions that others miss, who understand problems that others ignore, who have insights that could transform everything if only someone would listen." The audience began to murmur with recognition. They knew these people in their own organizations. The student who struggles in traditional assessments but understands concepts deeply. The teacher who's quiet in faculty meetings but whose classroom consistently produces remarkable results. The support staff member who notices patterns that could improve everyone's effectiveness. Julia's voice grew stronger as she reached the heart of her message. True leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about creating space for every smart person in the room to contribute. It's not about having all the answers. It's about asking questions that help others find their voices. Dr. Sarah Chen from Portland, who'd become one of Julia's strongest advocates, stood up in the audience. "Julia, your approach has transformed not just how we implement technology, but how we think about recognizing potential in our students and staff. Can you speak to how this principle applies beyond the corporate world?" Julia smiled, remembering how intimidating Dr. Chen had seemed during that first difficult conference call. "Dr. Chen, what we've learned at Brighter Future applies anywhere. People work together toward common goals. Whether it's a classroom, a school district, a company, or a community organization, the principles are the same. Every group has untapped wisdom. Every team includes people whose contributions aren't fully recognized. Every organization can benefit from creating systems that surface insights from unexpected sources." She clicked to her final slide, which showed a simple but powerful diagram, a circle with multiple arrows pointing inward, labeled Inclusive Innovation Model. This isn't just about being nice to quiet people. This is about recognizing that sustainable innovation requires diverse perspectives. The challenges we face in education, achievement gaps, resource limitations, technological integration, these complex problems need solutions that come from multiple viewpoints, not just the traditional voices of authority. The audience erupted in sustained applause, but Julia wasn't finished. "I want to leave you with a challenge. When you return to your organizations, look for the people who've been listening while others have been talking. Find the employees who solve problems quietly, rather than claiming credit loudly. Identify the individuals who understand your mission, not because they've been told what it is, but because they've experienced why it matters." Her voice carried the passion that had always been there, now amplified by confidence and experience. "Because here's what I know for certain. In every organization, in every classroom, in every community, there are people waiting to contribute something extraordinary. They're not waiting for permission. They're waiting for recognition. They're not looking for special treatment. They're looking for the opportunity to serve." As the conference concluded, Julia found herself surrounded by educators eager to share their own stories of overlooked potential. A principal from rural Montana told her about a custodian who developed an innovative literacy program for struggling readers. A superintendent from inner-city Detroit described a parent volunteer whose insights had transformed their community engagement strategy. But the conversation that moved Julia most came from a young teacher named Rebecca Martinez, who approached her with tears in her eyes. "Miss Park," Rebecca said, "I've been teaching for 3 years and I've felt invisible the entire time. I have so many ideas about how to help my English language learners, but whenever I try to share them in faculty meetings, I'm told I need more experience. Your story gives me hope that persistence and preparation can eventually lead to recognition." Julia took Rebecca's hands in hers, remembering her own feelings of invisibility and frustration. "Rebecca, don't wait for permission to implement your ideas in your own classroom. Document everything, the strategies you try, the results you achieve, the insights you gain. Build your evidence quietly and persistently, and remember that the most important recognition comes from the students whose lives you're changing, even if the adults around you don't notice yet." As the evening wound down, Julia walked through the same lobby where she'd once felt so small and insignificant. Now the marble walls reflected back the image of a woman who'd found her voice and used it to amplify others. Mr. Howard, who'd stayed for the entire conference, met her near the security desk where their friendship had first begun. "You know, what I'm proudest of?" he asked, his weathered face creased with a smile. "What's that, Mr. Howard? You never forgot where you came from. Success didn't make you loud. It made you more committed to helping other quiet voices get heard." Daniel Rowe joined them, carrying the conference materials and wearing an expression of deep satisfaction. "Julia, I have to ask, do you ever regret the path that brought you here? The interrupted education, the temporary job, the months of feeling overlooked?" Julia considered the question seriously. A year ago, she might have said yes. The pain of deferred dreams and dismissed contributions had felt overwhelming at times. "Daniel, I've learned that sometimes what looks like a detour is actually the most direct path to where you're supposed to be. If I'd finished college on schedule, I might have become a kindergarten teacher, which would have been wonderful. But I would never have understood the intersection of education and technology the way I do now. I wouldn't have experienced what it feels like to be invisible, so I couldn't help other invisible people find their voices." She gestured around the bustling lobby, where conference attendees were still engaged in animated conversations about implementing inclusive leadership practices. Everything that happened, the loss, the struggle, the feeling of being overlooked, it all prepared me for this moment, for this work, for the opportunity to help other people realize that their perspective matters, even when the world tells them it doesn't. As the three of them stood together in the lobby, the security guard who'd always seen potential, the CEO who'd learned to recognize different types of leadership, and the former temporary assistant who'd become a director, they represented something profound about human possibility. "Oh, you know what the real message of this story is," Julia said, her voice carrying the wisdom earned through struggle and triumph. "It's not that quiet people are better than loud people, or that being overlooked is somehow noble. The message is that every person contains multitudes. Every individual has some unique combination of experience, insight, and capability that could benefit the whole." The lobby was nearly empty now, but Julia's words echoed with the weight of truth. The tragedy isn't that some people get promoted and others don't. The tragedy is when we create systems that only recognize one type of intelligence, one style of contribution, one way of being valuable. When we do that, we don't just hurt the people who get overlooked. We hurt ourselves by missing the insights that could make everything better.